Hello, welcome to this series on the elements of reasoning, focused in this session on purpose and thinking. This series again is entitled The Elements of Reasoning Going Deeper. For those of you who are aware of the elements of reasoning, this will be a next step for you. We're going to be exploring the question of purpose, the role of purpose in thinking, and how it's connected to the other elements of reasoning, why it is important in human life and in human thought. I'm Linda Elder, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Gerald Nosich. We are coming to you from the Foundation for Critical Thinking. And I'd like to begin, if I could, with you, Gerald, just giving us a brief overview of the role of purpose in thinking in connection with the elements of reasoning, for those who are not aware of the elements of reasoning as a starting place.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Good to see you again. So the elements of reasoning, we often describe them as the parts of thinking. They're elements, the way the chemical elements are the parts of all substances. Well, the elements of reasoning are the parts of all reasoning. So there are 8 of them. Briefly, they are purpose, assumptions, implications, point of view, information, and a few others, 8 of them altogether. And the idea is that whenever you reason about anything, you always have a purpose. You're always making assumptions. There are always implications and consequences. You're always doing so from some point of view or multiple points of view. Point of view is another element of reasoning. You're always addressing a question. That's 5 of them. So the elements of reasoning are the parts of thinking. And all 8 of these are essential. Purpose is one of them. So the idea is, whenever we think about something, whenever we're reasoning our way through something, we have a purpose. We have a purpose in mind or in the back of our mind. Purposes are sometimes unconscious. We have a purpose, we have a goal or goals, we have objectives, something we're trying to achieve. So how does purpose fit with the other elements of reasoning? Well, for this, I could say actually 2 opposite things, or nearly opposite things. One is that purpose underlies all the other 7. So if I'm a teacher and my goal, my purpose is to teach my students to write better, to write more critically, meaning more clearly, more accurately, with greater sense of what's relevant to the issue at hand. So my purpose is to teach my students to write better. Well, having that purpose generates for me assumptions. Like an assumption I'm making is that I can make an appreciable difference for my students by teaching them about writing, that they'll be able to write better. An implication of it might be that they are in fact writing better. That purpose generates a point of view. The point of view is a pedagogical point of view, the teacher's point of view, and that's the one I'm approaching the whole thing from. So purpose, in a way, underlies all the other elements. So that's one thing I'm going to say. Next thing I'm going to say seems in a way almost the opposite, but it's not really the opposite. It's that what I've just said about purpose, I could also say about any of the other elements. Any one of the elements underlies all 7. So take assumptions. That's one of the elements of reasoning. I'm always making assumptions. So if I assume that it's very important for my students to be able to write more clearly, to be able to write better and more accurately, well, that generates the purpose. The purpose is, okay, so my purpose is to teach my students to write better. So on the one hand, it looks like purpose comes first and assumptions come second. On the other way of reading it, oftentimes in life, assumptions come first or come earlier than purpose. Similarly, implications and consequences. So if I realize that an implication of learning to write is that my students are going to write better, and an implication of not teaching them to write means they're not going to be as successful in their life and their careers later on, that can then generate the purpose. Or just take point of view. If I'm a teacher, my point of view is that of a teacher. I want to teach my students how to do things. And that means how to think about things and then carry them out. So I might then say, okay, in keeping with that point of view, so what are my goals? And I ask myself that question. Notice I haven't begun with my goals, my purpose. I've begun with my point of view. So that's something that's true of the elements of reasoning. They interlock with one another, they interweave, and there's no one that goes first. That said, I can say for the purpose of our work today, I can say we can think of purpose as underlying all the other seven. So that's my brief recapitulation of the elements.
So, yes, thank you. So let me just sort of clarify here and maybe ask a question. So my understanding of the elements of reasoning, based on what you've said and based on my knowledge, is that whenever we reason through anything, these parts are present.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means that whenever you think for a purpose within a point of view based on assumptions leading to implications and consequences. We use data, facts, and experiences to make inferences and judgments based on concepts and theories to answer a question or solve a problem. So we've got these 8 elements that are there whenever we reason, no matter what. And so what that leads me to ask is, well, if these parts are always present, then it stands to reason that we as humans should be very aware of these parts because they're driving our reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yet we really don't use these terms in human life very, very much or very well. They are used. Mm-hmm. These terms all come from natural languages, but so we have these 8 elements. So whether we're reasoning very well or very poorly, these parts are present.
Right. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that's interesting before we go forward into purpose is that the elements of reasoning presumably are conclusive, meaning that these are the 8 elements we can boil reasoning down to.
Right.
And unlike intellectual standards, where we're pulling 9 or 10 or 12 or some number from a much larger list and from many constellations, and unlike virtue, where we have a much larger set potentially than we have with the 8 elements of reasoning. So the question then is, I guess it's more of a fascinating part of this, that in all of the time that we've been working with these 8 elements in this form, in this circular form, no one has ever come up and said, well, you're missing an element, where we couldn't give them a reasonable answer as to why we were missing that element that they thought was an element.
Right.
So it's remarkable that reasoning was boiled down to these 8 elements.
Yeah.
So we have this powerful set of tools developed by Richard, and then with you working with him in the early 1980s. And I know that it was when you were working with Richard that the list went from, I think, 9 to 8 and then into the circle. And that is something that now we, coming after that in history, have this circle handed to us, as it were, on a silver platter. So we didn't have to figure out these elements. They're figured out for us. Right. And so therefore, does it make it even harder to use the elements, to appreciate the elements of reasoning when they've been handed to us this way? Oh yeah, that's really obvious. Yeah, of course you have purpose and you've got question and information inferences.
Yeah, Yeah, that's interesting, Linda. That's right, and it's true of almost all reasoning. When you reason something out well, maybe for the first time, after a while, it just becomes obvious.
Mhm.
I mean, it's empirical things too. I mean, the continental drift and the way continents go to one another. You can look at a map and you can see it's obvious how South America and Africa fit together and North America fits with Europe. It's obvious how these fit together, but it wasn't obvious beforehand. Very many things are like that in science and in reasoning. And I think it's true of the elements as well. There is something remarkable about it. Here's a thing that Richard and I used to say, that these 8 are the 8, the 8. So if you find something else that's an element of reasoning, then either it's already on the list implicitly, or we need to increase the circle. We need to add a new element. But I have not heard anyone add anything that wasn't already on it. For instance, hypothesis is an element of reasoning, and we don't list it there. But a hypothesis really is a kind of conclusion or assumption that's held tentatively. So there's a way it's already on the list. And you mentioned the 9 that we originally had in the circle. The 9th one was reasons. And we eliminated it because it made it more complicated. And there's a sense in which reasons is already in the circle of elements. So your reasons for believing something or doing something will be an assumption you make about it, or an implication and consequence, something you see happening, or some information that you have, or a concept that you have. I've mentioned 4 of the elements. So reasons is actually one that fits together with a number of the elements, not all of them, but all of them, but almost all of them. So yeah, it is kind of remarkable, but you're right. It's hard to appreciate them when you say, oh, here are the 8 elements, and the person says, oh yeah, oh yes, I got it. Oh, right, I got it. And it just goes away very quickly. And that makes it difficult to see how powerful they are. Just reverting to purpose for a moment. Sometimes it's very easy to identify my purpose or my goals in doing X, Y, or Z. But sometimes it's just extremely difficult, or it's very complicated. And it's remarkable, as you mentioned, that we're much of the time quite unaware of our goals. or even if we are aware of them, we forget that awareness as we go through life. Many people want to get rich in order to be happy. That's their goal. And but they devote themselves to getting rich, and they kind of lose the happiness part of it because they're engaged in making more money. Crude example, but
right. Well, it's hard to talk about one of the elements without talking about the other elements, as you've mentioned. So if taking your example, if that's the way that the person is thinking, then they're actually not thinking through the implications of actively pursuing that purpose. Because if they think that just making money is going to make them happy, then they need to rethink. They need to think through the implications of that belief, and actually imagine themselves in that position, and would that really be what made them happy? You see what I mean? We're not good at thinking through implications when we think about our purposes.
Right. And and thinking about purpose actually helps you see implications more clearly. It's part of what you said about becoming aware of our purposes or our goals in doing anything.
Yes. So
can I ask you something?
Yes.
So one thing we were talking about earlier is so it's not just a matter of identifying my purpose or my goals. It's also a matter of evaluating them, right? And I'd like to ask you, what do you think about that, or how does it work to be evaluating my purposes, that they're not just given?
Yes, it's interesting. That was exactly what I was on that line of thought, because I think that when we do use the elements of reasoning, and when we do actively use the concept of purpose, it frequently is, or these processes are frequently done in a somewhat superficial way. So that we say, okay, well, what's the purpose of science? Now that can be taken deeply or superficially. But we sort of think, okay, you're just going to apply it to science, or you're just going to apply it to this little problem or that little problem. And any of those may be significant in themselves. So I don't want to diminish that point. But in pursuing these questions, and let's say playing by the rules, okay, what's my purpose right now? Okay, what's my purpose right now? Okay, let's use the word purpose and then by thinking of it that way, we're sort of missing the whole boat of critical thinking in the way that I think of critical thinking, because critical thinking should set you free if it does nothing else. It should set you free as a thinker. And part of that freedom comes with achieving and pursuing purposes that have deep meaning for you personally, and that connect with your ability to achieve your own capacity in a world that is largely pathological. So we can't pretend as if we're reasoning in some kind of a sane world that's always sane and reasonable. We're reasoning in a world that's just full of potholes everywhere. Yes, there's a road. Yes, we can get there, but we're falling into a lot of holes along the way as thinkers. So what I'm saying is that we're not, I guess I could say it this way, we're not thinking critically, we're not using the elements of reasoning well, and here we're focusing on purpose, either to deal with these individual questions or the deepest questions for us personally, which are focused on what we highly value, and I guess in which we have belief in our ability to achieve these purposes.
Right. That last one you mentioned seems particularly poignant to me, because part of evaluating goals or purposes in society, but I'm thinking much more on a personal level, is really coming to terms with whether it's realistic to think of me as achieving them, to think of myself as being able to achieve them. So, I mean, there are all these movies about how you should follow your dream, follow your dreams, where a dream is standing in for purpose, achieve your goals, you follow your dream. That's a very important thing to do in life. And the way those movies work out, the person who follows his or her dream achieves it and gets this great measure of fulfillment. But in my experience, many more people are hurt dramatically by following their dreams when they're unrealistic dreams. I had a student who was in accounting in her last year, and she very much wanted to be a poet. And she came to me for advice, and she says, I want to give up accounting in order to be a poet. And because I have a streak of romanticism in me, she thought I was going to say, follow your dreams, go out and be a poet. And I said, oh, whatever you do, don't give up being an accountant in your last year. I mean, you may at some future point decide not to be an accountant, but you do need to come realistically to terms with whether you can achieve being a poet, or whether you want to dedicate your life to becoming a professional basketball player when you're 10 years old. So I know a lot of people whose dreams who've been kind of disastrous. They live with disappointment for much of their lives. So,
yes, if I could. So this is all related to purpose in the way that I'm thinking of this, but it may not seem that way. That is obviously, but for example, when you're in school, and let's say you're in middle school now, or maybe even earlier, but certainly by the time you're in high school, the teachers that are concerned with you, and your counselors at school that are concerned with your future, will try to help you figure out, what kind of job you can pursue. And maybe they give you even one of those inventory things, so this is all about your purpose. So what, and so you, so you imagine yourself, looking at a list into which you are to fit yourself and your future. So, one of these is accounting, and one of these is poetry. And probably that's not even on the list, because they're only including the ones where you can actually make money. Because so we have to realize that our purposes, to the degree that we even feel that we are in active command of our purposes still fit within capitalist culture. And this again is one of the things that critical thinking helps us see, that we're not, sort of pie in the sky. Okay, what is your purpose? And well, how are you going to just achieve your capacity? Well, how do you do this and maintain your sense of self, which should be a key purpose for all of us? How do you maintain your sense of self in a world that is frequently so dysfunctional? And this is a very serious question facing many people. And we're losing people because they don't have sense of purpose. They don't think that they can achieve sense of purpose. They're checking out, as it were. They don't see any point in trying to fit themselves into this world that we've created as collectively as humans. So I think what I'm saying is that our best hope is to have the highest ideals we can for ourselves, while being realistic, recognizing we all still have to make a living unless we were born independently wealthy. And then, so we have to make a living, and that reality has to fit into something that will not make me lose my sense of self as my purpose.
Right. The sense of self is just this essential part of all purposes. And there's a way, to use a kind of old-fashioned term, alienation. There's a way in which that's a major part of alienation, is that I go after this or that economic success, financial success, and I lose my sense of self, or I get so wrapped up in my work, becoming a workaholic, that I lose my sense of self. I lose that self of mine. So it seems to me to be essential that in almost all cases, maintaining or enriching my sense of self, my sense of who I am and what constitutes me, has to be embodied in the whatever other goals and purposes I have. And it's not even just me, it's, as you say, making our society better, making our not necessarily country, but the world a better place.
So now we're into some more complexities. So not only do I have to, let us say that I have these high ideals, and let us say that I have a high sense of self, and let's say I lay out for myself as a high school student a plan for my future that seems reasonable based on these realities, and that I can live within, I can still feel that I can achieve something of importance, whatever that may be. Now, that's going to be essential. I think that will be a necessary condition for, let us say, self-actualization. And yet we are continually having to fit our purposes into other purposes, as you mentioned, not only other purposes that I have for myself, like to have certain kinds of outlets, such as, let's say, gardening, or let's say extensive reading, time for extensive reading. So we've got multiple purposes as we live a complex human life. And then if we add children to that equation, then suddenly whatever purposes you had to begin with, they're all gone now. And your only purpose is to raise this child as it seems. In other words, and this is, as we know, a serious problem for parents because they become overwhelmed with parenting, and they do lose often their sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine when you're in school being told these things, being told that as you go through life, one of the first things that you want to do is command your purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to pursue and achieve high purposes because you're capable of that. Imagine that everyone was taught that.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you're going to have to fit your purposes into other purposes. So life is going to be complex.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have to fit your purposes into societal purposes. And some of those purposes will make sense and some of them will not make sense. And you'll have to be able to distinguish the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we should be telling people, rather than, do you think that you're inclined to be this, or do you think you're inclined to be that?
Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm.
So I would say that this discussion of, let us say, the achievement of high purposes and your own chosen purposes based in criticality, so and based in ethics, that this line of reasoning connects for me with existentialist thinking, because there the focus is on the importance of creating significant meaning in your own life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, Viktor Frankl, who developed logotherapy, he pushed this one idea with some others, but this is the main idea. The main idea is that you have got to find the meaning for you. And he wrote Man's Search for Meaning. So is one example of one of his books. So this idea that you can't achieve happiness unless you have developed and established these deeper meanings and purposes for yourself. And in Frankl's case, he connected it to his being in the Nazi concentration camps, and he could see that his ability to survive was clearly connected to the meaning he was able to achieve every day. And he was a medical doctor, so he was able to help people, and it was as an example. So of course he had already developed the theory before he was imprisoned, but my point is that, and that's just one example of existentialist thinking. And I do think that this conversation is basically missing from human societies in many cases, in that we're not asking people, well, what are your purposes? What do you think your unique talents are? What are your unique capacities?
Mm-hmm.
What can you really, what can you, Linda, or you, Gerald, what can you give? And some people are able to find that path more easily. And some people are going to pursue that path, as it were, no matter what, kicking and screaming, for example. So you can take for instance, many musicians that I can think of who, if they weren't a musician, I can't imagine what they would be. And it seems to be that's their way of surviving in the world. Not every single one of them, but it's a pattern. So life is strange. I'm a musician. I'll write music about how life is strange, something like that. And that's how I'll survive it. And that's how I'll give meaning to it. And that's how I'll find beauty in it. And that's all I can really do. But I'll do that well. I'll do it at the highest level of my ability. And I would like for everyone to have that belief in their own potency toward their purposes.
Well, let me say just something about the meaningfulness of life and achieving happiness. And I know you're speaking loosely when you say achieve happiness, because at least my experience is I can achieve happiness sometimes, and other times not, and other times the opposite of happiness. So it's not like finding life to be meaningful, I just achieve happiness. And I know that when Frankl says things like that, he's speaking loosely. He doesn't mean to imply that there's just this state of happiness and we can achieve it. But I also want to take something that seems to me to be more mundane, but also very profound. And it's that having a large scale vision of myself and my place in the world and trying to achieve meaningful goals and find meaning in myself, all of that is tremendously important. But there's this Eastern phrase of chop wood, carry water, meaning after you've thought through all the ideas and you're finding meaning in the world, you still have to wash the dishes. Right?
Yes, I'm very aware.
Yeah.
I'm painfully aware.
Yeah. But by being aware of your meaning in life, you can actually fit washing the dishes into the large scale thing and find meaning in the sensual aspect of it, of having the water run over your hands and realizing that you're doing something that's building toward the future, not toward liberating the world, but not going against liberating the world on the other hand as well. So there are purposes and there are other purposes. There's a kind of hierarchy of purposes, or
Yes.
That's not the right word, because it's not like this is above this one. They're coexistent purposes which fit together only in an uneasy way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, there is a lot in that. There are many mundane things that we all must do to live a human life. And I think to me, happiness, when I say happiness, I don't mean every minute of the day. That would be an impossibility. But I mean a kind of state of mind that is more like a sense of everything's all right. Everything's just fine.
Right.
Everything's I've got basically control over my life, and as well as anyone can. I can do the things I want to do and I feel are important to do. And so to me, that is what happiness is, because if you're asking for more than that, you're asking for like euphoria all the time or something. And that's a different matter. But it is very important to be careful in our use of terms and be clear about what we mean by a concept. And that's one of the things that critical thinking helps us do. So that's one thing I wanted to say. So but on the mundane, so now you were giving the example of washing the dishes. So the way that I personally handle that is whenever I'm washing the dishes, I turn on the music fairly loudly and I move. I'm like dancing while I'm in the kitchen. So I just move my body any way that I can. So I think, okay, so all right, I'm going to be doing this, but I can still also listen to music and I can move. So you see, that's an example of how you can take a mundane thing that you have to do and make it into something fun. And, people, I've seen this, people when they're, some women or men that are like cleaning their house and they're dancing around while they're cleaning their house. So these are not trivial discussions, right? Because if you're having to wash the dishes, how many, minutes a day, how many minutes are you, quote, giving up? And how can you make that more palatable? And that is, to me, an important purpose, making life palatable all the way, every day, every step, right? If I can. Right. So then shows that in many small ways, we can take command of our purposes and our thinking. The other more generally, and the other thing that what you said reminded me of is Stephen Covey's his focus on the importance of spending time thinking through questions that are not urgent, but they're very significant. Because those are the ones that tend to be neglected.
Right.
And this gets at the heart of the question, what is my real, I don't like to use the term, what is my purpose in life, as if it were handed down to me.
Right.
But what do I see as the most important purposes in my life? And really at the end of your life, you can, you want to be able to answer that in a way that's satisfactory to yourself. So you want to be able to say, I did what I tried to do. And even though I may not have succeeded, I did pursue my purposes as well as I could have in the world that we live in, given the realities that I have had to face and that we have to face.
Yeah. A difficulty in that for me is if I were at the end of my life right now and I'm in hospice and I'm thinking, did I achieve my purposes? I think I would probably yet say, well, yeah, to a large extent, yes, or I did the best I could at them. But to me, there's also something very misleading about it, in that the purposes I identify for myself now at my age are not the purposes I would have identified for myself 20 years ago, much less 40 years ago. So if I'd made a list of my purposes at various times in my life, these are my goals, these are my goals, these are my goals. Many of those I will not have achieved. Not only that, but I will think, wow, why did I ever want to achieve that at all? So there's this kind of misleading, it's actually kind of egocentric. There's this egocentric quality to it in that my present purposes, my present goals seem in my mind as if they're the goals that have guided my whole life. Of course, all I have to do is think back to adolescence when my goals were all over the place and some of them really completely unrealistic. And I agree with you, like to the extent that as I have these mature goals that I've matured into a way of thinking about fulfillment of my life is whether I've achieved those purposes or done my best given circumstances to achieve them. Yeah. So, or to further.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yes. But that wouldn't necessarily be true. Well, to some extent, it would most likely be true for everyone if you go all the way back to, your teen years. So, but I think for some people, they have a clearer sense of purpose early on and they stick with that clear sense of purpose.
Richard.
And well, there are lots of people who do that. I met a guy the other day who tunes pianos. He's been doing this all of his life. He said that he decided to do that when he was in high school. And so this is many decades later. So there are some people who that would just be one part of their person's life. Right. But so again, we're complicated. We're not just, we don't just have one track that we're working on. We're not just the professional person. We're also pursuing intimate relationships, or again, we may be parenting. We may be, so yes, we need, but at any time in our life, we need to be able to ask the question, what are the important purposes for me that I'm pursuing?
Yeah.
And do I believe in my ability to achieve purposes that are realistic for me? So if I wanted to do something like, be the best basketball player in the world, then that would be a joke, because even if I'd started at the right age, I'm way too short.
Right.
So there isn't any point in pretending that you can do something that you're not capable of doing. Part of criticality is knowing what you're capable of.
Right.
And
Right.
so this is connected with intellectual humility. But
Mm-hmm.
so I want to be, and I have to be realistic about what I can achieve. But within that capacity, there is so much room for growth for everyone. Right. All of us will die with masses of undeveloped capacities. And I don't, that bothers me. Because I remember as a child being told that we only use 10% of our brain.
Yeah, turns out that's not true, but
well, it didn't make sense then either. But in any case, we know that we don't use, and we don't develop our minds as well as we could as a rule. And there's a lot more development there. And what I want to point out, I guess, very strongly is that we have to believe in our ability to achieve our capacities. And that belief is very difficult for people to sometimes I don't know exactly how to say it, to come into that belief, to actually believe that belief, to accept that truth about themselves. Because instead we tend to self-handicap and tell ourselves how we can't, why we can't, that we're stuck in this job, that we can't do that we have to do that. And a lot of that is because of capitalism. Not all of it, but some of it.
Well, let me say that if I'm understanding you correctly, I probably disagree to a certain extent in this way, in that you are bothered by the fact that we have all these capacities, that we have many capacities that we will not fulfill or achieve within, or even achieve to a significant degree. And I would say I'm in fact not bothered by that at all. not even a little. So I'm hearing an assumption in yours that there's some obligation or there's some impulse to fulfill all one's capacities. And to me, the impulse is, well, I'm gonna do the best I can in most situations, and I don't really believe I'm gonna have enormous success in fulfilling the capacities that I have. But what I really want to stress is that I'm really quite content with the amount of fulfillment of my capacities that I have. So I think that might vary from one person to another.
I think that I do agree with that, with all that that you said to some degree. And that one thing is that as I was talking about achieving our capacities, you see, it's a bit of a trick situation, because anyone who has developed their thinking in a certain area, let's just say, let's say you spent a lifetime studying critical thinking theory, but let's say instead of that, you had studied something else as much as that. Well, or something in another field as much as that, or in another field, or any other field. You see that you couldn't possibly achieve all of the, let's say, knowledge that you would be capable of, because you've only got so many years to live, even if you live longer than everyone else lives. So there, that's why it's kind of the way that I said it was a little misleading. But let's just say that what I think is very sad is that many people have a lot of capacity that they're not developing, and then they suffer and we suffer.
Right.
And in other words, we need everyone thinking at the highest level of quality here on this planet. That's the only way we're going to solve the problems, is if we get some kind of critical mass thinking critically. Well, that means you have to develop your thinking. And you've got to develop it also in certain ways. Yes, I do think we have an ethical obligation. So one of our purposes is to be concerned with the common good. And that is something that some people dedicate their lives to, that purpose.
Mhm.
And other people do what they can while contributing in other ways. Do you see? But it still is contributing to higher ground,
Mhm.
to a better world.
Mhm. Let me mention something about how very easy it is. Well, let me hold off on the punchline to tell you the setup for it. So here's when I work on my book on critical thinking across the curriculum, I actually read some books on management. Here's the dominant management paradigm. To engage, to be a strong manager, you have to think in terms of three concepts. You have to plan, organize, and lead. All right. So that's the essence of management: plan, organize, and lead. So, but now here's the punchline for me. Notice that what they left out was purpose.
Yes, I did see that.
Plan toward what? Organize toward what? Lead toward what? So there's a way which the dominant management paradigm leaves out the most central feature, which is purpose. Right? And that's very easy to do. It's easy because we kind of take purpose for granted and don't articulate it in our mind, don't enunciate it. And I think that's omnipresent. I think that's in each of us as individuals, in organizations, in governments, in schools, in virtually any context. It's easy to overlook purpose and lose sight of it.
Like so much of the foundations of critical thinking. In other words, they're so easy, they're hard. I say that very often, but it's really true. So you say, well, whenever you reason, you have a purpose. Right. Okay, so the person says, yeah, of course I have a purpose.
Right.
So, well, yes, but how often do you actually use the term purpose as a tool for living better?
Right.
Yeah. And that means you've got to say, well, let's see, when I'm in this this discussion or this disagreement with my intimate other, do I stop and say, wait a minute, are we fighting right now? Are we arguing? Is this what's my purpose?
Right.
What is your purpose?
Right.
What's happening here? Right. Is this the way we want to live? Is this the way we intend to live together?
Wow, very nice example. Yeah, that's right.
So we want to use the term purpose. We want to bring it alive, and we want to be, a good activity would be to every day, at the end of the day, ask yourself how often you even thought about your purposes that day. Did you ever even think the word purpose? Did you ever bring that up? Or maybe you're already focusing on two big purposes that are significant to you. So at the end of every day, you can say, well, of course I did, because I'm working on this book, or I'm working on this article, right? Or I'm working on this project. And that's so then I could say, all right, what about, yes, but remember what Gerald said, that you're not just focusing on one purpose. So what about your other purposes?
Right.
So you can't just lean on that every time and say, of course I'm perfect. I've got my purpose cut out for me.
Yeah.
So you can say, wait a minute, what about your conversation with your daughter or your conversation with your son? What was your purpose there? You see? And then when you let's say you fail to, I'll speak for myself, let's say I fail to do the amount of exercise that I think I need to do in a given week, let's say. So I can say, yes, but I did all these other important things. But I can say, wait a minute, yes, but do those purposes outrank your health? Because nothing should outrank your health. Right? How can that be? Oscar Wilde, in one of his characters, says, health is the first responsibility of life.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but it's true, because you have to keep yourself alive and going, right? So you've got to balance these purposes. And sometimes I say, well, yes, but today I'm just going to write on my book. That's it. Okay, I'm not going to do any exercises. And that's fine, because that's what I decide to do right now. But if that's what I do on a typical day, then I'm going to suffer physically.
Yeah, and you mentioned an activity at the end of the day. To what extent have I achieved or worked toward my purposes overall today? Another activity that seems to me to be in some way similar and leads to in my mind at least, greater depth is to see the purpose behind the purpose, behind the purpose, behind the purpose, in that their purposes maybe are always, tend to be embedded in one another. So here's another business analogy. I'm not in business, but it's a marketing one. And it's a man who's building a toy for his child and goes into the hardware store to buy a drill. And the marketing statement is, you're a salesperson. You think that the person is coming in because the person wants a drill, but it's not true. The person is coming in because the person wants a hole, and he's using the drill to drill the hole. Now that's a whole range of things, because actually that's not right either. The person's not after a hole. A person's after a new toy for the child, right? And person's not actually after a new toy for the child, but probably the person is after giving some joyful experience to the child. Now that might be the end of it, because kind of pleasurable, richy experiences might be goals in themselves. But even that one, I might say, well, I want my child to have joyful experiences so that his or her life can be richer for having had the real foundation. So purposes embed in purposes. So it would be a nice activity at the end of the day to ask, okay, so what are my purposes? So I'm writing, my purpose is to write this book, and I've been doing that all day. So what's my purpose in writing this book? And what's the purpose behind that? And what's the purpose behind that? And I'm not thinking of it as a way of criticizing myself. So today I've failed to make the world, to achieve world peace. I'm not thinking of it that way as something to criticize myself for, but just to put things in context and deepen my understanding of myself and what I see as my role or what's meaningful for me.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's really powerful, Gerald. That's very powerful. And this, of course, is connected to implications, because as you were thinking about purposes and purpose, I was thinking of implications. These are implications in terms of purpose. And yes, and that does take us to deeper ground, and it does remind us to stay on track, because we can get off track in that process somewhere. And so if your purpose is to have, if you have a child and your purpose is for the child to grow up to be a caring, contributing member of society, then you can ask yourself how creating this toy for this child is going to result in that. And maybe that's too crude an example, because we give our children toys for different reasons. And I'm not against toys. I'm just saying that sometimes we do get off, and we have a purpose, and it was a noble purpose, but then the way it gets manifest is not necessarily in keeping with the original purpose. I want to just cover one other thing. There are lots of things we could cover, but I'd like to bring this to a close in a few minutes, if that's all right. But I would like to, before we close, focus just briefly on how we started by talking about the purpose, and we started talking about purpose in relationship with the elements of reasoning. We talked about how the elements of reasoning are self-contained, so to speak. So these are the elements, and we don't know of any others, because any others we come up with, we could fit into these somewhere in one or more places. Therefore, they're a little muddy, and therefore they don't really deserve an element of their own. So, but within each element of reasoning, we have, as it were, more than one word. So we have purpose. We've talked about purpose, but there are other words that are, let's say, synonyms for purpose, and serve slightly different functions in the language. So I would like to just talk briefly about that for a couple of minutes. Now, the ones that we typically think of are, would you like to answer that? The ones we typically think of in that?
Goals, objectives, our target, and not a synonym, but an illustration might be, I'm climbing Mount Everest, and the the goal is the top of Mount Everest, right? And it's the one I'm taking the steps toward. But goal in other, I mean, I use the word dream as in following your dream. Their dream means your goal or your purpose on a deep level. So I think of those goals, objectives, desired outcomes. I think of those as the main synonyms I would use in most contexts, but many others appear in other contexts. Yeah.
And we can expand the elements to, for example, not just human reasoning, but to, let's say, other living things, such as plants. So we don't say, what is the purpose of a plant? We say, what is the function of a plant?
Right.
Say, we might say, what is the purpose of a cat? We could say, what is the function of a cat, depending on how we're thinking of that. So function is also a synonym in certain cases, depending on what we're focusing on.
Function's a peculiar one, though, in that I actually purposely didn't mention it with objectives and goals and everything, because it's in a different category, in that the elements are the elements of reasoning, right? They're not the elements of things.
Yes.
Right? And it's not like it's not like the elements of reasoning apply to leaves on a tree, right? So leaves don't make assumptions. They don't have implications and consequences. Our thinking about leaves has, we're making assumptions and implications. So, but, and function kind of bridges that, because I'm thinking of what's the function of a leaf, but really it would be better if I were going to try to be really precise and careful, I would say, what do I see as the function of the leaf? That is to make it part of the reasoning. But one of the reasons we emphasize function so much is that old pre-Darwinian view that that biological things were made for a purpose, and that's all changed. So now biologists use the word function rather than purpose. Right. So yeah, so function is an interesting one to me with my empirical
yes. So we have different ways of saying purpose, and these different words serve slightly different purposes in the context. So we might have, in addition to the ones that you mentioned, we might have intent. I don't think you mentioned that. What direction am I going in? So when people say, if somebody says, well, the direction I'm going in today, or the direction I'm taking in my life is as follows. And somebody else said, well, she never mentioned purpose. Well, she didn't have to mention purpose. Right. It's the same. So I don't want people to feel that, purpose is like the magic word. It's a word that we've chosen as the most overarching for that element.
Indeed, yeah.
But there are other ways of saying purpose.
Yeah, that seems to me to be a good way of thinking about all of the elements, that each of the wedges in the circle of elements that we put out, in that they're a kind of a cluster of very similarly functioning terms, assumptions, presuppositions, what we take for granted. And it's not as if one word takes precedence over the other. It's much more contextual than that. And it seems to me that's a good way of looking at it, rather than kind of enforcing some rule about which term to use.
Yes. Yeah. And obviously we haven't really talked about the application of intellectual standards to purpose, right? But we obviously need to be clear about our purposes. We need to make sure our purposes are justifiable in context. I don't know that it makes sense to say our purpose is accurate unless you told me what our purpose was, and then I repeated it in my own words, and that might apply. The standard of accuracy may apply there. So we need to be able to take the elements of reasoning and decide whether they apply to this particular element. So we obviously want to make sure it's clear, that's justifiable, that's, as you've already mentioned, relevant to the question at issue, and so forth.
Realistic. we mentioned whether it was realistic or not.
Right, right.
Said,
And whether our purposes are consistent with one another. So we may have put purposes that pull us in multiple directions, right? So a person may be in a relationship with a person that's not maybe their ideal partner, but then they have a child with that partner. And so one of their purposes is to provide the best atmosphere for the child and to provide the best care that they can, and maybe they feel they have to stay together with this other person because they have two purposes that are vying and that don't connect, and that can cause and will cause problems and confusions. And so we need to be aware of this. We need to be able to say, okay, my purpose here is this, but I don't know that I can have that fulfilled right now because my purpose here is that, and this is more important than that. And I'm not saying that that's a justifiable way of thinking in this example. I'm just saying that that's an example of where you may have purposes that are they're not consistent with one another, and that is going to cause problems for us in our thinking.
Right. And to revert to something I said a little bit earlier about the changeability of our purposes, or the changeability of my perception of my purposes or goals. And so if in the example you gave, the person I'm with is not really the person I need to be with in my life, but I'm going to stay with the person for the benefit of the child. And I recognize that that's the right decision to make, and I weigh many factors, and so I carry it out. One thing that happens to many people is that years later, the child is now grown, I can experience just great regret at not having gone down the road that I had contemplated before. And I may not lose sight of the decision I made back then, but it will no longer seem so clear cut, especially in my feelings. I'll think, oh, I wish I could have done X, Y, and Z.
Absolutely.
But instead, and maybe the instead doesn't even come in. It can just be, oh, I live with someone who's not fulfilling for me or for my partner either. So what happens often is that we lose sight, and you can see it in kind of major tragic cases where I want my adolescent child to develop real skills in the world, and so I teach them to drive or have them taught to drive, and they take the car out, and then some tragic event occurs. With the child driving the car, the adolescent driving the car. And my purpose was to help them achieve themselves. But the tragic event can kind of erase that.
Yes.
You can think, I should not have done that. It's too early. I can second guess myself all over the place. And it seems to me part of critical thinking about life is to make sure that I keep in my mind the reasonability of decisions I've made and the reasonability of the purposes I've chosen to pursue.
Well, the example that I brought up is actually a very maybe it was a bad example, maybe it was a good example because it's a very common example. But it's a bad example because it's not clear what.
Right.
On the one hand, it seems to some people you'd say, well, it's obvious you shouldn't stay together for the sake of the child because they're going to grow up with people who don't really love each other, and you're going to actually not achieve what you want to achieve in the first place, but you'll think you're going to achieve it. That's one possibility. But it's easy to say that when we don't take into account, for example, again, capitalism. What if by divorcing, the child now ends up in poverty? So there are implications for that we can't ignore. So it's a very complicated kind of example, and again, a common one. And I don't say that there's an easy answer, but I do say that we have two purposes or more, And mostly we need to be aware of these purposes and be deliberate about the process. And as Gerald often reminds us, and then afterwards, we don't get to go back and bully ourselves and beat ourselves up for making the wrong decisions when we used our best thinking at the time. We didn't just ignore critical thinking and just, do what we wanted. We did our best thinking, and it turns out it wasn't the best thing to have done.
Yeah. So it brings up for me something I often begin a workshop with. I ask people to identify some circumstance in their life where they've thought through something critically, and another one where they haven't thought through something critically, or they've thought it through badly, and have people tabulate. But then the critical thinking question afterwards is, how did you tell? How did you tell that you
yes.
thought of critical thinking or not? And far and away, here's the most usual way people have of telling. It's outcome. And that is, did I reason through it well? I can tell because it turned out well. And that's not a good criterion to use, right? Because I can read through something very well, and it cannot turn out well through circumstances that I had no control over. So the way to tell is that I take account of all the relevant information, that I check my assumptions as well as I'm able to, that I look for the implications and consequences as well as I could back then. And that's when I've reasoned it out well. But outcome, purpose, another version of purpose, outcome is not a good indicator at all. And it's the thing that people most use, to use your good word, to bully themselves after the fact, right? Didn't turn out.
That's I'm so glad that you shared that. And actually my parenting example fits here as well. So there are an unlimited number of examples of parents who objectively did a very good job of parenting. If we were to just judge their parenting, and their at least one child end up to be a kind of rotten apple. So you see, in any parent who's ever been through that will say, yeah, yes, I know what you mean. I did all that I could, not that I was the perfect parent. And then I was very surprised when my child was an adult, and they turned out to be very different from what I would have expected, given all that I gave and all that I did and all that I thought that I was doing.
Right. And it goes the other way as well. I kind of have this reputation of having been a very good father. And one of the ways people say it is they say, well, look at how well your son turned out. But it's very doubtful to me that I can claim very much of the credit for that, in that, I've contributed fairly surely, but that doesn't mean that I'm a major part of the cause. I mean, people say, well, you must have done something right. Well, that doesn't mean you ought to have done something right. I mean, children of serial killers can turn out to be fine human beings. It doesn't mean that their parents have done something right. So
yes,
right.
Yes, this is the problem with DNA versus conditioning. And we get to a point where we can't, because we can't do an experiment on each of us. Say, well, we're going to take Linda, we're going to duplicate you into 10 different people, and one we'll put in this kind of family, and one in this kind of family, and one in this. So we only get one chance at it. Well, Gerald, as always, this has been enlightening and enjoyable. And thank you for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you too, Linda. This has been really enjoyable and enriching for me. I've actually learned a good deal from talking about it. It's always lovely when that happens. It's kind of like the experiences I always had after the conference, when you and I and Richard would stay together for about a week and just talk about everything in the light of critical thinking. So it's been very rich. Thank you.
It also shows that when we take any given concept in critical thinking, we can just continue to develop our understanding of that concept and go deeper and deeper with more examples and making more connections. And no one has ever plumbed the depths of the elements of reasoning.
Right.
And so this is a beginning place for that. So thank you again. And we'll say goodbye and thank you to all of you who are listening and joining us today.
Good night.